So you're maybe moving in a world in social media and sports a little different. How do you deal with it?
Me personally, I've gotten my fair share of hate messages and ugly, mean comments over the years. You kind of learn to tune out the noise. I'm not going to say it's fun. Sometimes you can laugh at some of the comments you receive, but I think it's very important to kind of separate what people say and what you believe.
Welcome back to Beyond the Buzzer, the podcast that examines how focusing on your future during your playing days is the ultimate game plan. I'm Aboudi Al-Katan.
I'm Sam Douglas, and today we've got a great episode lined up for you guys.
Yes, we do. Today's guest is Aliya Boshnaq, a 23-year-old young athlete who's already doing big things on and off the track, making her our first non-basketball related guest. Aliya competed at the 2020 Tokyo Olympics. She won bronze at the Asian Indoor Championships in 2016. She's the national champion for 400 meters in Jordan and a U18 200 and 400 meter Arab champion.
That is very, very impressive. She was also the captain of Yale's women's track and field team and now currently working at McKinsey, one of the most successful consulting companies in the world.
Aliya, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here. A little nervous, but very happy to be speaking with both of you.
No reason to be nervous. Between your athletic accomplishments and your professional career so far, you genuinely embody what it means to be on this show.
We get all of that, Aliya. Nothing we missed. Don't be humble. I really want to hear a little bit more stuff because Aboudi said a lot of great stuff about you. Accolades just go on and on and on. Give me some more.
Well, you got the gist of it, but there are a few other things. So I am also the Jordanian national record holder in the 200 and the 400 across all age categories. So under 18, under 20, and the senior record holder. I also have those records for indoor track. I have the indoor senior record in the 60 and the official under 18 and under 20 record in the 100 meters. So, but apart from that, you got most of it down.
Talk your talk. Look, Aliya, we have a brand new segment on our show called The Shot Clock. We're at the very beginning of every episode in a way to introduce our guests to the audience. We're going to ask a couple of quick fire questions and we're going to see how many we can get through in a couple of minutes.
My worst part of my race is my reaction time. So we'll see how this goes.
What has been the worst loss you ever experienced?
I think athletically, it's definitely been being disqualified at the Olympics. I think it's not necessarily a loss, but it did feel like a loss because it was definitely something I worked really hard towards.
What is your go-to cheat meal?
It has to be a Cinnabon cinnamon roll or anything cinnamon roll.
What do you listen to get in the mood ahead of a big race?
So I actually have 3 songs that I play on cue before I start getting into the zone. The first is Vivaldi's 4 Seasons. The second is usually something like cheesy happy. So any ABBA song. And last season, the last one was Tataki by Argy because it had a really good beat.
What is your favorite sports movie?
I don't know, but recently the Beckham documentary almost made me cry. So as of right now, I'll pick that.
Favorite sports team?
I would say Real Madrid just because that's the loyalty of my family. So I'll pick that.
What other sport would you want to play?
Gymnastics was my first love. So I'd be a gymnast if I didn't grow a foot in senior year. And if not that, potentially a tennis player.
Last good movie you watched?
I rewatched The Holiday yesterday and that's a classic. But actually, The Teacher is the last good movie I watched. Amazing, amazing Palestinian film that just got released.
What object do you lose the most?
My wallet.
Do you ever think about quitting?
Yes, but it's never in a serious capacity.
Who is the best athlete in your family bar yourself?
My brother was a super talented athlete. He doesn't do sports seriously anymore.
Biggest pet peeve?
People chewing loudly.
Okay, we're going to spend a couple seconds digesting some of those answers. But the first one that you really messed up on, it's not the basketball answer. It's the fact that technically speaking, we are like fourth cousins. So I am the best athlete in your family. And I'm quite offended you didn't say me.
What do you think about that, Aliya? Tell me, what do you
Well,
think?
sorry. I need to keep him on my good side for the rest of this podcast. So I'll say yes.
So you did mention you had a very tough loss. Do you want to talk about it?
Yeah, sure. So basically, I mentioned that I was disqualified in the Olympics running the 400 meters. What actually ended up happening is that the side of my foot touched the line, the inside side of the line. And at the time, there was a rule that if you have a touch on the line, you're automatically disqualified. Later, that rule was adjusted, but that's besides the point. I reached the finish line and I hadn't really realized or internalized what had taken place. And I got back to a slew of such positive messages, congratulatory messages about me competing in the Olympics. And I went back home after my race and I just cried. I cried for so long. I couldn't talk to my coaches. I just was isolating myself for a little bit and then snapped out of it and proceeded to continue as if it was the most incredible race of my life, or not race of my life, but most incredible experience, even though it really, really hurt. And for the longest time, I couldn't even Google 400 meters race Tokyo because I couldn't see that DQ next to my name.
Sorry to dive in a little bit more into this, but I know in track is definitely different. And when you said you got over it, it took you a while. How long did it take? Because usually in basketball for us, we play a game probably in the next week or so, and it gives us a chance to forget about the last loss. And I remember in 2011 when we lost in the championship game to China, in China by 1 point, it left such a sour taste, and it took me a while to get over it. How'd you heal? How'd you get over it? And did you have a lot of tough nights where you're waking up at night because of that reason?
I wouldn't say it was tough nights. It was more that when I was asked about the Olympics, I kind of diverted the conversation from anything that had to do with athletics to kind of the broader experience of being there, which on one hand is what the Olympics is about. It's a crazy environment where all the world's top athletes are in a singular place for a short amount of time. But also it was my way of kind of compartmentalizing, which it tends to be how I process things. But I think with time, I went back. So after the Olympics, I had 1 week at home, went back to school, to college, and restarted my indoor track season. And being able to race and do well slowly started to remind me like, okay, you're good. It actually was a fluke that you made this mistake. It took about a year for me to reopen that, like the results page, and be able to search for pictures from that race and to be able to rewatch that race. And it's not like it's something I never consider or think about right now in the lead up towards Paris. But I think I've come to terms with it. I speak more about it now with my close friends. And yeah.
Do you, and maybe it's too soon to ask, but do you at least now, are you able to find some sort of positive from it? Or is that still something that you struggle to deal with?
No, I definitely think there's a positive to it. For one, it made me appreciate being there more and kind of understand sports for more than a singular race. It also relit a fire that I don't know would still be there had everything went according to plan. And adversity makes things more interesting all the time. That's kind of how I like to look at things. It gives a story, and it and like when one looks back at it, or when I look back at the way my mind worked in 2021, 2020 about athletics and how it does now, there's been a shift in mindset that I think is in large due to how events played out.
Well, honestly, thank you for being so open and authentic about it. It's such a good segue into sort of the crux of our interview, where now Sam and I are going to ask you more questions relating to how your journey as an athlete transpired, and also how now you balance your career and your education. So Sam, why don't you get us started?
I want to hear from you about your journey. And when was the first moment you realized, like, oh, wow, I'm actually pretty good and I can actually do this for a living?
So when I qualified in 2017 to the World Youth Championships, I became the first Jordanian woman in history to actually get the qualifying mark and make it there. And that in itself, I was super, super happy about. And at one point, I kind of was like, okay, we did what we have to do. And my coach was like, no, you can get so much faster. You can make it to the semifinals at the World Championships. And I didn't believe him, but I kind of was like, okay, cool, like, let's do that. And in the lead up to that championships, I got super, super ill. So in my head, that kind of was out the window. Maybe subconsciously it wasn't, but I was telling myself like, no way, no way. But then I was able to push through to find that like extra gear and to actually make it to the semifinals. And in that moment, when I was able to kind of run the best race I had ever run, when my body wasn't feeling its very best, and run a massive PR, rank quite highly globally, I thought that, yeah, I can do well here, and this is just the beginning, because I was a young skinny bean, literal string bean. So I really felt like there was so much more in the tank, and I really think that is the most that is such an exciting feeling, to feel like you did well, but you also have so much more to give.
So how did you get into the sport? Like, what got you into track and field? Anybody in the family? How?
I think I mentioned earlier, I used to do gymnastics, and we had a school gymnastics team. But funnily enough, we had a gymnastics team. We didn't have a track and field team. So there was a track and field race that our school was hosting, and they had anybody who was seemingly athletic participate. So I ran my first race. It was 100 meters, and I did quite well. I also jumped the high jump that same meet, and was approached by a coach who said, like, you're pretty good, you should consider doing this. And I kind of brushed it off, continued with gymnastics, but slowly but surely started participating in more and more meets. And with time, realized that I could be pretty fast, I could participate nationally and do pretty well. And then once I got to 10th grade, which is when I became eligible to compete at a national level in international and represent Jordan, I decided I should start to take this a little bit seriously.
You're a lot younger than Aboudi and I. So you're maybe moving in a world in social media and sports a little different. How do you deal with it? I can imagine, is it always positive or?
Definitely not always positive. I think being an athlete in the age of social media is quite interesting, because you do receive following and attention that you may or may not have otherwise. And that sort of publicity is often encouraging. But on the flip side, you have people who may not know too much about the sport that really love to share their opinions. And me personally, I've gotten my fair share of hate messages and
Right.
ugly, mean comments over the years. It started when I first entered onto the scene, comments about my Arabic or the fact that I was a little bit quiet at the time. And then it progressed into comments about my looks and comments about why or why not I'm being chosen to represent Jordan in particular functions. And you kind of learn to tune out the noise I'm not going to say it's fun. Sometimes you can laugh at some of the comments you receive, but I think it's very important to kind of separate what people say and what you believe is actually true.
So I'm going to tap into this a little bit further because I know from our friendship that you're quite vocal and outspoken about what's going on in Palestine at the moment. So how have you dealt with that, given that you have a platform that even recently you've started to really sort of take off on social media, but you've maintained that stance of, speaking your heart and speaking from your mind?
I think for me, it was a no-brainer because, yes, I'm an athlete, but first and foremost, I'm a human being, and seeing what is happening in Palestine and knowing that I had an audience that could benefit from being vocal, I just knew I had to speak about it and continue to speak about it. I think I wasn't very comfortable with vocalizing my opinions in the past. Especially since I grew up in an environment in Amman where most people shared the same opinions that I did in terms of Palestine and in terms of broadly geopolitics in the region. But then when I was thrown into an environment in the US where that wasn't the status quo, I learned how to bring such conversations to the table in a way that doesn't really alienate people, but also and kind of walks them through the true historical events. And I think there's so much more I could say and do, but I'm learning to still navigate that space.
I think that's fair. I think it's something we're all learning how to deal with and learning how to use our platforms in the right way. But on to our next question. So track is interesting in that you are technically on the same team as your male counterparts, right? So do you feel like it's harder as an Arab woman to get the same opportunity as your male teammates? And if the answer to that question is yes, does that drive you or does that sometimes discourage you?
In the broader world of global track and field, everybody knows Usain Bolt, but barely, and much fewer people know Shelly-Ann Fraser-Pryce, who arguably is as decorated as an athlete. So the opportunities for women in track and field are much, much less, especially in a sport where generally you kind of really only know the top dog. But I do have to say that I was very lucky to grow up in an environment with mentors that supported me irrespective, or maybe even more because of the fact that I am a woman. Be that my mentors and teachers in school, my coaches in university, but there definitely are hardships in terms of, and so much progress to be made in terms of how the sport is presented regionally and internationally.
Aliya, how do you feel knowing that there might be a young Arab woman looking at you thinking, wow, I want to be like Aliya one day? Is there a lot of pressure on you to behave or conduct yourself in a certain way, being a role model that you are?
It definitely does put some pressure on, knowing that people look up to me in any way, shape, or form. But it's a good type of pressure. It's the type of pressure that when you really don't feel like doing something or you're super exhausted, I push through because of. It's such a privilege to even have someone think of me as a role model. And so, yeah.
Sam, this is a question I could also ask you, right? Because of the platform you've built and what you've gone through. Do you ever feel like even now, given the fact that you're still growing your platform and you're still becoming more and more known in the regional sort of basketball space, are you sometimes teetering on how to act in public, how to conduct yourself? Do you feel like there's a spotlight on you as well?
I believe so. I think you're always being watched, and I think you need to conduct yourself in your best behavior, but you still got to be yourself in a way. But I think you have to realize that once you chose that path, you have to realize that there is kids going to look up to you and they want to be like you and they want to follow your footsteps. So you really have to be careful what you show out in public and what you don't show. A lot of people say that's contradicting who you really are, but I don't really believe so. I think some of the personal things need to stay personal, need to stay in-house. And what you want to put out in the public, that's for the public, for them to see. And I think that's where a lot of athletes at times make mistake, where they put all their baggage out there, which I think it's incorrect. Sometimes it does help them in a way. But I think it's better to keep some of the things in-house, personal, within your community, within your circle, not community, excuse me. I just believe it's better. Granted, I did play with some teammates that told me, I'm not a role model. Don't expect me to act in a certain way. I want to be myself, and I don't really care. So you have both.
Aliya, the next couple of questions are why we have you on this podcast. So one of the things I really want to dive into is the fact that you've started your professional career at one of the big four, right? One of the most renowned consulting companies in the world. But whereas sports allow you to excel by expressing yourself, you work somewhere that is very corporate, checks and balances, rules and regulations. Talk us through your experience so far. What have you learned? And if you see yourself in a similar role, years in the future in your career, or if you think you could adopt more of an entrepreneurial path somewhere down the line.
So I'm super fresh at my new job. I just started in September, and it's my first real job ever. So it's been a really, really steep learning curve. But so far, it's been great. I think the most exciting part of my current job is the ability to explore so many different areas in such detail, and be able to become a sort of expert in X or Y or Z. It has been a challenge to adapt and adopt to the specific way of work and the very regimented style, but also the routine that comes with working a full-time job. And in terms of where I see myself in the future, I think it changes on a day-to-day. Some days I'm like, yes, I see myself in this field for quite a long time. And others I'm like, not exactly sure. I think it's going to come down to me eventually, hopefully, fingers crossed, finding my niche and what I am more passionate about in the world separate from like my athletic career. I think my personality is so, yeah, sure, I can do this, I can do that, take it all on. But very quickly, I've come to realize that saying no to things and kind of setting the expectations from the beginning is the only way that I could possibly succeed.
Let me dive a little bit more into your answer. You're still running track, right? You're still training. How are you able to do that working full time? That's beyond me. I don't know, because I do see it here in Jordan. Most women athletes have full-time jobs, and yet they still dedicate their life to the sport they love. How do you guys do that? Because I couldn't do it. There's no way I would have been able to do it. So please tell me a little bit more about that.
My old high school principal used to say, whenever I was a little bit stressed, if you want something done well, give it to the busiest person you know. So, but in reality, there is definitely truth to that, because it means that that person can balance their time. But that's not to say that that person should have to squeeze that much into a short amount of time. So, and like things will then fall through the cracks. I'd be lying to you if I said that it's an ideal situation to work such a demanding job and to compete full time. But what my routine has come to be is I prefer to train as much as I can in the morning and do them before I get to the office, and then have some sessions in the afternoon around 5 to 7 p.m. That has been possible for the majority of the time, but not always. And the interesting thing about working in consulting is it's project-based. So it makes setting a routine even more difficult, because for a project that's 10 weeks, you have something that works, you get into a groove, and then you're assigned to something else where the expectations are different and you have to reset your norms and your boundaries again. So I'm still learning. It's not perfect, but I'm trying my best to prioritize rest and also fit everything in.
I'm sure your off days are sleep days, recovery days with that schedule.
Yeah, the weekend is really important. The sleep on the weekend is super, super important. But I'm learning to balance. And I know you mentioned that it's the case for a lot of athletes in Jordan.
Athletes especially.
Women athletes in Jordan specifically, that they work full time and also pursue their sports. And I think that touches on a very important systematic problem. The fact that we are having to balance reflects a distrust in the situation, in the structure of sports in Jordan and in the possibilities of making an actual career out of sports. And oftentimes the risk is just too large because there's no financial backing or confidence in leadership at certain given points. There's a lot of unpredictability. So I think slowly but surely, with more success of women athletes, that can change. But there also needs to be support from local sponsors and federations and Olympic committees to make that more of a possibility.
Do you think having one eye on the future, already looking at what you'd like to do next, is there a small chance that it might actually distract your performance?
Oh, yeah, for sure. To give you guys an example, I was just in South Africa for 3 weeks. I was doing a training camp there and also chose to go do that training camp to kind of get really back on track and really reset my orientation coming into this Olympic year. And for those 3 weeks, the first of which I wasn't working, and the second 2 I was working remotely, but kind of reduced hours. I felt like a completely different person. I had so much more time to train and I was resting and eating well and surrounded by all these really high performing athletes. And it was a wake-up call to remember that people are living like this full-time for years and years and years, working towards their goals and their dreams. So, and it really put me in this contemplative mindset where I was like, okay, I think I should give myself a fair shot for a year, more than a year, to kind of go all in, so I have no regrets going forward. So yeah, to answer your question, some things fall through the cracks, no matter how good of a routine you keep.
I think Aliya is a very unique case in that her full-time job is very, like I said earlier, regimented and requires such a focus on the actual schedule. And you have to commit to that schedule well in advance. I'm very fortunate in that what I do for a full time is very flexible. And I have employers that have always empowered me to do extra things. So whereas my answer to that question would have been different, and I would have said that I actually think balancing something else with the sport has always allowed me to play at a higher level. If I had to do something like consulting, like investment banking, I do think it would get to a point where I'd be burning the candle at both ends and I wouldn't be able to excel the way maybe I would if I was still playing, if I were to still be playing basketball right now.
Like you said, I think it's the nature of the job and the nature of the sport that makes it difficult. Difficult, not impossible, is one thing. And number two is that there is definitely something to be said about having something else to think about, another outlet for my thoughts or my creativity or my academic passions. And like, I'm the type of person who, even in a world where I wasn't working full time, I think I would still be working part time, because I can close my computer, go to the track, and think super intensely about being on the track when I'm there. But then once I get back home, I'm thinking about something else, because otherwise
it consumes you. It takes over your life.
It consumes you. And I think this sort of intensity with which I would think about track would eventually kind of burn out if I was only thinking about it all the time.
What advice would you have given yourself at the beginning of your running journey? And is there one thing you wish you would have done differently now that you look back?
There are two things. The first is enjoy it. The second is pain is a privilege, especially in the face of delayed gratification. Like, being able to put yourself through pain is a privilege. And I think anytime you're injured, you kind of realize that. But then there's a third thing, actually. The third thing is something I actually need to remind myself of now, is don't be ashamed of the hard work you put in, and like embrace that process. I think a lot of times it's scary to kind of admit to yourself how much work you've put in, because that makes the quest, if you don't succeed, even more daunting. But being proud of that and being proud of the commitment and the sacrifice and owning up to it is definitely something I need to keep reminding myself on a daily basis.
Sam, I told you she's a lot wiser than a regular 23-year-old.
Definitely. I'm very impressed.
Look, we're going to enter the final part of the show today. The idea is we ask you some broader based questions more generally about life, and then we'll wrap up towards the end. How does that sound?
Cool. Amazing.
Are you scared or worried about what happens when you finally finish your career?
Not really. I'm scared of what I'm going to do with my competitive spirit. But I think everything comes to an end eventually.
That's usually interesting at a 23-year-old answering such an answer, because when I was 23, I wasn't even thinking about that. I thought I was going to play basketball till I'm 90. I
think part of it is the fact that like I am working. A lot of my friends are athletes, but a lot of them are non-athletes. So I see that there's a life beyond my running, even though right now I love it so much, and a good workout can keep me going and release so many happy hormones. So like that last me through the week, through the month.
If you could fast forward 20 years into the future, how would you want to be described?
Oh my goodness. Fast forward 20 years, I would say don't do that. I can't think that far ahead. And that's, I think, been kind of the theme since COVID. I think it was COVID that did this to me, where I feel like I don't plan that far ahead. But what I'd want my legacy as an athlete to be is somebody who rose to the occasion, was there for her teammates, and in the face of any sort of adversity, still kind of gave her all at the line.
Final question. What is a belief you once held firmly that you have since changed, and what experience or knowledge led to that shift? How has that change influenced your approach to life?
If in the lead up to something, things aren't going well, it doesn't mean that the outcome is not going to be positive. And that has proven true time and time again in sports, where the weeks prior to a meet, not going well, and then the race, something good happens. And in academics, you're preparing for a test, you think you know nothing, and suddenly you can write or answer in a positive way. In terms of friendships, you're worried about a certain thing and it ends up not being the case. So kind of don't read too deeply into every little thing.
I tend to agree that one of the most challenging things in life is knowing when something is a sign and knowing when something is just, that's the way the world works. So I love that answer.
And I think like, if we want to relate this all back to sports, again, having a bad practice is not a sign that you should stop showing up. Having a singular bad race is not a sign that this isn't for you. And reminding myself of that actively is super useful.
Aliya, it's been an absolute pleasure. We knew the episode was going to be great. We didn't know it was going to be this smooth. I want to thank you so much for your time.
I was going to say that before we close, there is one thing that I'm going to maybe we can bring in some way, shape or form. So as of right now, I'm part of the Jordan Athletes Commission. So what we do is kind of work towards a lot of topics that you brought up, career transition after sports, and kind of building a more supportive environment for athletes in Jordan. And I think that side of athletics is super important for me and I think that's also why when you asked the question about me not being super nervous about potentially my career ending in some way, shape, or form down the line, is because I always envision that I will remain involved in athletics in some capacity. And I think the capacity is making the athletic environment more supportive for athletes so they can continue to achieve great results, be that, of course, in Jordan, regionally, and hopefully globally as well. I don't think there is a network, a supportive network of athletes globally in the way that there should be. And there are a lot of problems and common themes across the globe that athletes face, be it career transition, be it recognition, mental health, etc. So that is one angle of sports that I think is super important, like what happens behind the scenes. And a little plug for myself, I am running for the Global Athletes Commission, and the elections take place in Paris, 2024. So
we told you before, talk your talk. Always talk your talk when you come on this show.
Yeah. And so basically the voting happens, all athletes at the village will be able to vote. And hopefully I'm given the opportunity to serve all the athletes globally, because it's something I'm super, super passionate about. And I think giving a voice to athletes from a region that are so often kind of left out of sporting conversations will be super important and helpful.
Sam, what an episode. What'd you think?
Wow. Man, I'm very impressed. For a 23-year-old to have her head straight like that, very impressive. And I loved how committed she is to helping athletes, how she's part of the athletes committee. And now she's going to be running, what did she say she's going to be running for?
She'll be running for the global faction of what she already is representing, yeah.
Right. So that is phenomenal, man. I'm very impressed.
I think something that made me happy was that she felt comfortable opening up about the Olympic story on our podcast, given that it wasn't something she'd spoken about publicly before. And I think that's what I want people to feel like when they come on our show, is that it's an opportunity that for them not only to speak about their achievements and how they balance sports and professional career, but also to open up and be authentic about some things that may not go as well, right? At the end of the day, you know better than anyone, with all the injuries you've been through, you know, the sporting journey is not one that is, in general, progress is not linear, right? So I think it's important that any of our guests come on the show and they can speak freely about some of the experiences they've had. So it made me very happy that she felt, you know, comfortable doing that.
Yeah, it's not easy. I'll tell you, I've said it earlier when we were asked that question. Till today, I still think about that game that could have sent us to the Olympics. It's not easy. And I hate when people ask me that question because it takes me back to that moment. So cheers to her for actually opening up about that topic. Thank you guys for tuning in. Remember, make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit the like button.
Wherever you're listening to the podcast, hitting the subscribe button does make a difference. So we'd really appreciate it for you to subscribe, whether it's on Anghami, Spotify, or YouTube.
Thank you, Aboudi. It was awesome. Another great one in the books, baby.
Thank you, brother. See you soon.